We're very excited to welcome Jordan Kennedy here. She is, I really like all of your descriptors that you have on your website.
Oh,
She's
thanks.
a tribal liaison, beaver behaviorist, engineer, and experimentalist, among other things. But all of those titles I think are extremely enticing. She's currently a postdoctoral investigator at Hui, and she's a member of the Blackfeet tribe. And we invited Jordan here today because the Falmouth Reads Together book, as many of you know, I hope, is Braiding Sweetgrass. And so I thought Jordan is a perfect person to talk about that melding of indigenous knowledge and traditional scientific thought, and something that I know a lot of people in the Woods Hole community have started to think more and more about in recent years, and we definitely need to continue that conversation. So thank you, Jordan. I'll hand it over to you.
So I'm going to talk about designing and engineering and maintaining our landscapes with non-human animal kin. But first, I'm going to start with the story of the sun. So in Blackfeet mythology and the Blackfeet creation story, the sun made the earth. The sun is the creator in the Blackfeet mythos, and the sun is many things, but he's also Napi, and Napi is our old man. And Napi, at the beginning, the whole world was covered in water, and he was floating on a raft with all the animals. And he said to Beaver, I wish to make land. Dive down, go down and get me some mud. So the Beaver dove down, and he was gone for a really long time, but then he floated back up dead on the surface with no mud in his paw. And then he asked Loon with the same task. So Loon went down and he dove, but he floated back up dead on the surface. And then he asked Otter, and Otter faced the same fate. And then finally he looked at Muskrat, and all the other animals were making fun of Muskrat because he's not as powerful of a swimmer as Otter or Beaver, not as graceful as Loon. But he dove anyway, and he was gone for a really, really long time. And when he finally came back up, he too floated dead on the water, but he had a little bit of mud in his hand. And with that mud, Napi grabbed it from his paw and he rolled on it into a ball and he blew on it and he made it bigger and bigger and bigger. And with that mud, Napi was able to make the earth. And here's the backbone of the world. This is where I grew up. That's the Rocky Mountain front here on the Great Plains, what the Blackfeet call the backbone of all things. This here is Sweetgrass Hills, Katoiksi. This is also on the Great Plains. This is one of the Blackfeet strongholds. And my name is Jordan Kennedy. I grew up on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. I am a first-generation descendant of the Blackfeet tribe. I am not an enrolled member. My father is an enrolled member. My children are enrolled members. There's all sorts of complications when it comes to being a part of a tribe. I'm currently serving as the Traditional Ecologic Knowledge Fellow for Woods Hole. And I also serve as the Tribal Partnerships Liaison in Beaver Behaviors for the Beaver Institute. And I want to acknowledge the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksikapi. So there's the Pakani, the Siksika, the Yamskampi Pakani, that's my people. And then you have the Kainai. So this story about the earth diver isn't really even that special among the Blackfeet. This is a narrative that repeats itself across North America and Europe. And I decided to plot that out, and I thought that was quite interesting. And then I decided to look at the distribution of beavers. I'm like, oh, look at that. There's a lot of overlap there. And maybe I'm reaching a bit. I might be reaching a bit. But I can imagine with these stories that are encoded within this ecologic memory, and it keeps coming up again, you have these glacial maximums. So 15,000 years ago, North America was covered by a big sheet of ice. Also in Europe, and these areas very much overlap with these areas where this earth diver narrative comes about. It's this narrative where there was this big influx of water and the world flooded. And so we could imagine at the end of the last glacial maximum, as these glaciers were receding, there was a lot of water. And it puts, and a lot of animals were moving in. In the real time right now in the Arctic, it's thawing. And the very first animals that are moving into the Arctic and terraforming it as the permafrost is melting are beavers. So we can see this happening in real time, where the idea that Beaver is a co-creator of the world isn't just a mythic idea, it's also a scientific idea that we can see in real time right now in the Arctic. In Ellen Wool's work, she's a geomorphologist, and she was looking at sediment cores throughout North America, and she's found that almost all the sediments of North America can be attributed to beaver occupying the wetlands. So as the glaciers are receding, as they're melting, beavers are showing up first, and they're terraforming these these wetlands, and they're terraforming the landscapes that we have today in terms of water. And more than that, as beavers were all over New England, and due to the fur trade, they started to get trapped out because they were the key material choice for when you wanted to wear a fancy man's hat. And so beavers started to get trapped out, and when they got trapped out of their ponds, what they left behind were meadows. And these meadows were the first areas that were colonized. They were the areas that were turned into farms first because all the trees were cleared, and it was just this meadow here. So there is this theory that a few authors have, like Ben Goldfort among others, have pointed out that many of the towns of New England are formed on ancient beaver ponds that had dried out. So the very maps of New England, the very towns of New England at their city centers were likely former beaver ponds. So it's not just the geomorphology that beavers have informed as we live on these landscapes, it's also very much our societal structure and how we're building towns and building roads and reconnecting our human ecosystem. So that's a big, brief story about beavers in North America and globally. But I want to talk about a really specific ecosystem where I'm from. This is the High Plains. This is the star there up on the map is running along the line of the backbone of the world, the Rocky Mountain. And this is quite literally where the Great Plains meets the Rocky Mountains. And this is an area that's defined as water limited with extremes in temperatures. It actually holds the world record for the biggest temperature swing in one day ever recorded, which is 100 degrees. That's the town I grew up in. So we get very, very hot summers, very, very cold winters. Limited precipitation, and it doesn't stay green long. So I'm going to talk about the traditional push and pull relationship of beaver, bison, and the Blackfeet with the cultural burning. So we have the Beaver River Valley complex. We're going to talk about some of the engineering and grazing behavior of the North American bison and how those grasslands were also co-engineered with the indigenous people who lived upon them. So the Blackfeet are holders of the Beaver bundle. The Beaver bundle is the oldest of its kind. So the Blackfeet did not have books. We didn't have a written language. We had bundles. And in those bundles, they're quite literally a hide of some animal. And in them, they had different objects. And every object was pulled out with a certain song or a certain story. And the way that you pull those objects out was in order. And so somebody could spend a significant portion of their life learning the stories and songs of this beaver bundle and how to take care of it. These bundles were considered like living things. They had their own soul, their own identity. And so to have one transferred to you was to carry the weight of that knowledge to the next generation. So this here is the opening of a beaver bundle. You have an older man here in the center. He's likely the holder. And then you have these younger men here that are learning the songs and stories so that they can inherit it and transfer it to the next generation. Many of our bundles were taken, and so when they were taken, they were considered to die because they're considered living things. They need to be cared for like living things and sung to and open. So many of the bundles that you find today in museum are considered dead objects. I'm also going to be talking about the cultural burning of the Amskampi Pakani, so the Blackfeet. As we are so colloquially named, we don't call ourselves the Blackfeet, but we're happy to be called that because we are so connected with burning. We would burn all the grasslands black, and then we cover our moccasins with soot. And so the Cree described us to French trappers as Blackfeet, and so the name stuck. And then I'm, of course, going to talk about bison, and it's almost impossible to talk about bison without talking about the Great Plains tribes. I'm also going to talk on this idea of indigenous science, and this is something I grapple with all the time. So this is where I've arrived. It's place-based knowledge, and it's living knowledge. And it operates within a value system of relationship, right? It's how you are practicing living and engaging with the world, and you're constantly thinking about how things relate and influence each other. And it, at its essence, requires that humans are fundamental to these relationships. You cannot remove yourself from them. You are part of it. And it's intergenerational knowledge passed down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's not something that is explicit. It's tied into language. It's tied into ceremony. It's tied into our food systems. Proto-Algonquin languages, like the Blackfeet language, are very literal. So the root word of bison is to be skinned. It's a very, because the language is so literal, there's a lot of embedded knowledge within the structure of the grammar of the language itself. So let's talk about beavers. So beavers are the largest rodent in North America, second largest in the world after the capybara. And they are famous for building. And and they live across North America, all the way up in Alaska, down into Mexico, and coast to coast. We're finding them even increasingly in intertidal zones. I was talking to a fur trapper in Florida who told me that he saw a beaver swimming in the panhandle of Florida, which is crazy. I had no idea that they would swim in salt water, but increasingly, as their populations are rebounding, they're moving into areas that we didn't know that they hung out in, like intertidal zones. They live in colonies of anywhere from 2 to 20 individuals. 20 is a bit extreme, and that's the highest ever reported, I think, but it's more along the lines of 10 would be a really good sized colony. It has a co-dominant mated pair, so a male, female, and then it has their offspring. And their offspring after 2 years leave. They go off on their own to start their own colony. And very famously, beavers build dams. But they don't just build dams. They'll excavate their ponds to make them wider and deeper. These are not just flooded structures. They excavate canal systems to gain access to aquatic and terrestrial resources, like vegetation and other ponds or other sources of water. They live in lodges. They do not live in their dams. They also build these extensive trail systems, and they make these trail systems in order to gain access to food over land. They have their food caches. They do not hibernate. They need to swim back and forth between their lodge and their food cache all winter long in order to survive. And they have their scent mounds. They're extremely territorial, and they mark out their territory with scent mounds on the furthest edges. And all of these structures come together to make a beaver damming complex. And this beaver damming complex is many, many times larger than any individual beaver. So this here in red, I have a bunch of the dams sketched out. I have the ponds in blue. I have the canals in purple and the trails in orange. And so these networks are absolutely massive. So each of these individual constructs that I talked about come together to make the beaver damming complex, which is what I frame as the architecture. And in addition to it being much, much larger than any individual beaver, it takes generations of beavers to build. So these are from 2003 to 2014. These are satellite images. And down below, I just traced out the exposed water. This is a groundwater system in the Great Plains where some beavers moved into it, dug up the groundwater, and brought this water to the surface. And so you can see here over time the expansion of the exposed water over time. When I was initially trying to do my PhD work, I was like, I must have looked crazy. I was driving around to random ranchers' houses and be like, hey, do you have beavers on your property? and this guy, Gear is his last name, and he was like, yeah, but you're not going to hurt them, are you? I'm like, no, I'm not going to hurt them. I just want to look at what they're building. And he was like, okay, good, because if you hurt these, he's like, if I didn't have beavers, I wouldn't have water, and if I didn't have water, I wouldn't be able to feed my cows. I was like, solid. So anyway, this is his property, and he let me fly back there with my drone and make that map. So in addition to these being very large multi-generational structures, they also are very complex, where every single damming complex has some element of all of these different constructs I talked about, whether it's dams, canals, trails, lodges, whatever it is. But the structure, the final architecture itself takes on a tremendous amount of different morphologies. So I have, Alaska, I have Concord, Massachusetts. I have Argentina, where they're an invasive species. I have Maine. I have Finland, where they're also an invasive species, and they're competing with castor fiber, the Eurasian beaver, and also here in Colorado as well, which I really like those canal systems there. And they're incredibly dynamic. They go through a series of expansion and contraction and expansion and contraction. So the longer I look at these, the more I'm kind of convinced I am. It looks like a heartbeat, right? It goes through these cyclical expansions and contractions, and it does. And here's a more like stable version of it, where the brighter the color, the older it is, and the lighter, the newer it is. And you can see the growth of these systems. This is a beaver damming complex in Acadia National Park.
Can you give it a sense of distance?
Oh yeah. So this is 60 meters here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're big. Yeah, they're really, really big. So, I mean, when I started studying these, I thought it was just about the dams, right? And I got up and I looked down and I was like, oh, they're tiny. Look at the size of this thing and these itty bitty dams. But anyway, we'll get there. So beavers are the ecosystem engineer. Like, they're very famous. And one of the reasons they're so good at engineering is they're generalists, right? So they excavate, they fell, they like to build, they clear vegetation, they do a lot of foraging. And what happens with all of these activities is they restructure the hydrology of the habitat through this. And so they're creating areas of fast flow and slow flow. And when you start driving that heterogeneity at the landscape scale, you start bringing in all of these different vegetation that are specializing in these different microhabitats that beavers make, which of course brings in other species. You got the invertebrates, you got clams, you got insects, you got some of the charismatic. So all of my knowledge is based out west. So, some of the big charismatic prey that we see out there, birds, and then we start bringing in bats, we bring in fish, amphibians, and then some of our bigger charismatic predators. At my field sites, I actually saw more grizzly bears than I saw beavers. So people are like, what were the beavers doing? I don't know, but there was a lot of bears. And then they also provide a lot of medicine as well, like literally the medicinal plants. Like we have a strain of peppermint tea that's an abortifacient that the Blackfeet would have and that they would use if they didn't want to have a baby. And so that particular strain of tea is always found in a beaver pond. The castor, and then of course just the microhabitats for bringing in all of these other species. I'm going to move on to bison next, but if you have any more questions about beavers. Okay. All right, let's go really quickly into bison. So let's talk about the status of the North American.
That's one question, sorry, about
Yeah.
the beaver. You said they create scent islands?
Scent mounds.
Scent mounds.
Yeah, but yeah, the island's a good way to think about them.
What, is it something they spray or?
Yeah, so they'll get mud, like they'll make these little mud piles, and then they have castor, and they just put castor everywhere. It comes out of their butt. Yeah. Yeah, they got castor glands in their anus, and that's how it comes out. But I mean, it doesn't smell bad. Like if you're walking near it, it smells like vanilla. Oh. Yeah. So when you're walking around a beaver pond, you can smell if a beaver pond's active because it literally smells like vanilla. Huh. Yeah. So let's talk about bison, and I know this is kind of like a weird segue into that, but if you were to talk to any of the Blackfeet elders about bison and beaver, they would tell you that they were brothers. And you're like, okay, like that doesn't make any sense. And I'm hoping at the end of this I can convince you that why that might be true. So the North American bison, I grew up calling them buffalo, so I might go back and forth. I'm saying the same thing, whether it's ini, which is the Blackfeet word for it, or bison or buffalo. So this is some of the early accounts of North American bison on the Great Plains, and they were described as uncountable, limitless, from the earth, renewed every spring. And so from that phrase, you can really pull out this sense of scale, you can pull out this sense of number, but you can also pull out this sense of movement, of cycle, with this renewing every single spring. So the North American bison, much like the North American beaver, they actually cohabitated in the same ecosystem. So the North American bison herds were all the way up in Alaska, all the way down into present-day Mexico, and found coast to coast. There was even, what I hear is there were bison even all the way down in Florida, which is crazy to think about. And they occupied all these different habitat types. So prior to colonization, they estimate there was anywhere between 30 and 60 million bison in North America. And then after the Louisiana Purchase, this significantly began to decline. And with the war against Red Cloud, I don't know how familiar people are with like Red Cloud's war against the U.S. military, which he won. But they don't talk about that in the history work. So Red Cloud did beat the U.S. military on North American soil. And so in order to subdue the tribes, there was a waged war on bison. They killed off all the bison to starve the tribes out because they couldn't beat them in combat. And so this was a very successful coup. I've heard numbers ranging anywhere from 40 animals to 700 animals that were left. So the North American bison of today have a severe genetic bottleneck. And the vast majority of bison have been crossbred with cattle, and there's been, I would say, very deliberate efforts to bring their populations back up. And today there's around 200,000 bison on tribal lands and another 20,000, that's too big, 20,000 and another 20,000 in ranchers. So there's around 40,000 bison today, which is pretty incredible given that they were sub 1,000 at the turn of the century. And that was the work of a lot of people who cared a lot. So let's talk about how bison engineer grasslands and how beavers engineer wetlands. And together, beavers are engineering wetlands that harbors a tremendous amount of carbon, sequesters carbon. And then also these grasslands are also another great way of sequestering carbon, which bison engineer. So this here is the last sustained mass migration of mammals on the planet. This is oh God, what part of Africa is it? The Okanagan River Delta. So this is wildebeest, which there are about 1.4 million wildebeest, hundreds of thousands of zebra. So around 2 million individuals annually that are moving on the landscape. And this is a massive event. They're eating, they're trampling, they're pooping. And through that process, they're completely re-engineering these grasslands. And so bison did the same thing in North America. So this is how they engineer. They are, what's the word I'm looking for? They are discriminatory grazers. And what I mean by that is they like their green grass. They will bypass a lot of yellow grass and they're going to go for the green stuff as fast as they can. So as a result of that, because they graze discriminately, you end up with heterogeneous grasslands. So you get areas of tall grass and short grass, and it's a dynamic mosaic that year after year changes. As they're going, they're picking up seeds. They're planting those seeds and they're making these microhabitats for different types of birds, different types of insects. There was actually a theory I saw, why does the antelope run so fast when the grass is so tall? Well, the idea was they followed behind the bison because they'd mow down the grass, so they could just run really, really fast. And this is, of course, bringing in other predators. These grasslands have incredibly deep root systems that sequester a tremendous amount of carbon, and very quickly too. So even though trees sequester more carbon, grasslands do it faster, which is, cooling. And then my favorite way with which bisons engineer are wallowing. And this is them giving themselves dirt baths where they'll roll on the ground. And they end up making these wallows that collect water and they become microponds, and amphibians love them. So frogs, if you've ever heard one of these, they're loud. There's frogs, everything's really loud when you get to listen to a bison wallow. And it's bringing in all these other species and insects. Dried out wallows become specialized habitat for different species of insect that like to burrow, which is of course bringing in these other grazers. These bison wallows are also really important for helping recharge the groundwater systems of the Great Plains, or were, I should say. And of course, bison were found in everything. But they are a missing ecosystem engineer. So 44 million animals is 20 times that of the last sustained animal migration on the planet. So the scale of what we are missing on our landscapes today is actually a bit unfathomable. To think that that's how many animals were moving on an annual basis, trampling, grazing, replanting the grasslands. And so there's some research questions there. Where did bison move and where did they go? Where did they migrate? Did they take any cues from their environment to inform that behavior? And so there's been some work out of Yellowstone National Park looking at that herd, and they have shown pretty convincingly that bison follow the green. But the problem is this is untestable at scale because this is what our landscapes look like today on the Great Plains. They are a landscape of boundaries. These are all farms. If you're an animal that has to navigate this, this is what you have to figure out how to go around. So given that, why do we even care how they moved? Why do we care about beaver and buffalo and their interactions? And why do we care about traditional ecologic knowledge and practices in this context? I'm going to give you a few reasons. Conservation efforts. So a lot of our grasslands in North America are wildly underprotected, in part because they were undervalued. I don't think people like who see grasslands for the first time, they're like, oh, look, it's a whole lot of nothing. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. There's a lot that goes on a grassland. There's a lot of different species that live there. And we also have, we have to figure out how to manage these landscapes as well. Water management is getting increasingly dry out west, looking at how the grasslands used to recharge by either having bison make the wallows themselves or engaging in bison wallow mimicry. Also, livestock management. Many ranchers have started to move their cattle in the way that bison may have moved across the landscape in order to reinitialize some of these grassland trophic cascades. And a lot of the ranchers that are doing this are seeing massive improvement in the grassland quality as they start doing this biomimicry of their cattle from bison. Sovereignty. So this is, I guess, the most contentious. So anytime you work with the tribe and you're finding all these archaeological artifacts, knowing this information is land rights. So it's inherently a political thing to think about bison, grassland, biodiversity credits, etc. So I'm going to just show a brief look at this. So this is Brent Brock. This is his data. He passed right before I started sharing this. I asked him, he gave me permission to share this data. This is his brainchild. What he did I thought was really novel and very wonderful. So he brought in the traditional knowledge of Kainaiquan. So this is Jim Blood. He's Ompskampi Pikani, and he shared the traditional narrative of the seasonal round of the Ompskampi Pikani, the Blackfeet. And then Brent took the greenness metric from satellite imagery and looked at it over time. But there's a few assumptions. So people say that the tribes followed the bison. I would say that they moved with them. Not so much following. I think it was more of more intentional than following. And so therefore these routes reflect a reasonable proxy for bison movement patterns historically. And it was roughly predictable. And this is a very small part of a very, very big story because there are many, many tribes of the Great Plains, and the Great Plains are absolutely massive. But you cannot think about bison without thinking about Native people. All right, so this here is in the winter, and it's a map of the United States and Canada. And this is Alberta. This is Montana. The blue is the current reservations of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So in the United States, Blackfeet, that's where I'm from, the Ompskampi Pikani, that's in blue. And then you have the Bloods up north and the Pikani further north than them. And right next to Glacier National Park there. And one is the winter encampment of the Ompskampi Pikani. This is where they went every single winter. Keep your eyes on the green. This is the Rocky Mountain Front, the backbone of the world. So in the spring, the Blackfeet start moving east onto the Great Plains, and what you'll see is they are going to the areas that are the greenest. Early summer, everything's greening up. It's great, but still, even though everything's green, they are still going to the very greenest spots. Midsummer, things are starting to dry up, so they start heading west towards the mountains. Late summer, things are quite dry, and they're heading back to the hills. Fall, and then back around in winter. And so this here is the seasonal rounds of the Ompskampi Pikani. And this, the red here is the idea of where to release bison back onto the landscape. But the black area is like a dreamed vision for where bison could be reintroduced to start managing these grasslands for us. But the problem is this is a landscape full of private ranchers who don't necessarily want bison competing with their grass, with their cows. There's farmers. And so these are landscapes that are contentious, but are increasingly getting drier and drier. But it's not enough just to say that bison were following the the green, because the Great Plains is massive and the whole thing is green. So saying they followed the green doesn't really mean anything. And also it's limited. So where do the bison go in the winter months? They go to the beaver damming complex. And you cannot think about bison without thinking about beaver. That's what my other claim I'm going to make. So the Blackfeet engaged in anthropogenic burning. So in the springtime, this was a cultural practice. I actually grew up doing this, and I didn't really realize that people didn't do this. So, yeah, I got some crazy stories from my dad was like 8 years old. He gave me a flare, and I'd go out in the field with him, and I'd burn the ditches with him. And I remember one time I saw him catch on fire, and he had to like roll on the ground, and he popped up and smiled at me. But anyway, like this is a practice that I grew up doing, and I didn't realize people didn't burn. It actually drives me crazy when I look around here and I see how dense the underbrush is right now, and nobody's burning it. Drives me insane. I'm like, oh, it's so dirty. Just drop a match. Just clean it. Just clean it. So anyway, that's, but this is cultural. This comes from a long line of the Blackfeet going out, burning these grasslands in the spring. And they would do these controlled burns in order to help better drive the behavior of the bison. So these areas, when you burn them, they green up sooner. And so that draws out bison from the winter pasture sooner. We knew where they were going because we burned the areas we wanted them to go to. And so they were actively engineering these grasslands to pull bison out to certain locations. And then they pushed, so they're being pulled from the front by the green grass, which was engineered through the anthropogenic burning, and being pushed from behind from the tribe following behind the herd. So this is like very intentional. But again, this is a very like limited thing, right? It's not going to stay green that long. This is from my dad's deck. This is a waterway. This is my dad's ranch, so that's the grasslands there. This is a different angle. You can see some moose there, and this is from May to August. A huge difference in the greenness of the grass. And again, these are water-limited environments. You get these peaks of flow. You get these extremes in temperatures throughout the year. The rivers have these big peaks of flow here. And so the beavers come in and they're able to capture this flow. And they're able to engineer the beaver damming complex. And these beaver damming complexes created these microhabitats. And these microhabitats, one, stayed greener longer. They were warmer. And there was more vegetation. So you could burn things and eat things and be protected from the wind of the Great Plains. So humans love this area. And so the Blackfeet didn't engage in hunting the beaver because the beaver is one of our fundamental animals of creation, and the beaver bundle is considered so powerful. So the Blackfeet did not engage in the fur trade like many of the other tribes did. And so as a result of that, we've never really lived on a landscape without beavers. We've always had beavers on the reservation because they were so culturally important. And it's like, so one of the last strongholds of beavers at their lowest population points was on the reservation. And then all the other ungulates also wanted to be in these areas because there was warm and there was water and there was green vegetation. And so when that happens, and we saw this in actually Yellowstone National Park before they introduced the wolves, is you got all these big grazers come in and they deplete all this vegetation in the waterlands, and then the beavers don't have anything to build with. And then they put wolves in there and they drove out, and suddenly the beavers are being benefited by the wolves being there. And that was the role many of these tribes played. They were kind of antagonistic to the big herd animals coming in trying to get water, and they would just hunt them, right? They're basically living in their own refrigerator, and they would. So you have this push and pull, you have the resources, you have this predator-prey dynamic with humans and bison and other large ungulates, and it's all kind of protecting this beaver ecosystem and habitat. So, and it lived in kind of this dynamic push and pull throughout the year in cycles. And so the Blackfeet tribe has done a tremendous amount of work with reintroducing bison back on tribal lands. So this is a conservation herd. The vast majority of bison in North America are crossbred with cattle. This herd, they started working on this bison herd in the 70s. They have less than 1% of cattle DNA, so they're conservation status animals. And and that's Chief in the background, that mountain. And they released half their conservation herd on the property, so 49 adults, 18 calves. And And I don't know if they've released more again, but this area, so this here is a map of the reservation. This is Glacier National Park. This is the conservationist allotment where they release the animals, and this conservation allotment is connected to Glacier National Park, Waterton National Park, the Lewis and Clark National Forest, the Bob Marshall Wilderness further south, but also the Kainai Woodlands up here in Canada, which is a total of 4.5 million acres of connected landscape that these animals have access to. However, bison are not animals of the mountains, they are animals of the Great Plains. And I don't want to undersell what a massive achievement it was to reintroduce this conservation herd back into Glacier National Park. So if you ever go to Glacier National Park and you see some bison, you can thank the Blackfeet tribe, they did that. But it wasn't just the Blackfeet tribe. I mean, my dad started his first job out of college when he started working for the tribe. He was working on this problem in like the 1970s. And then when I got done with college, I started working on the problem. Like this has been generations of people pushing this and setback and failure. And so this list, as big as it is very incomplete for the amount of work that the Blackfeet tribe has done with the reintroduction of bison. But a lot of people have really done a lot of work, the named and the unnamed. These groups are running their own science, looking at what's happening when you're reintroducing bison back to these landscapes. So pretty impressive stuff, I would say, with a lot of people. And the Blackfeet tribe is also doing a tremendous amount of work with beaver restoration efforts, where they're doing beaver dam analogs on their dry streams, and they're trying to get beaver back into some of these areas that are more degraded. We have really robust populations along the Rocky Mountain front. We're trying to get them further out along the plains to these areas that are a little water dry.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
How do you move the beavers? How do you bring them into new areas?
So beavers are very political as well. So one of the reasons this conservation work does so well with tribal nations is tribes, because they're sovereign nations, can make their own laws. So the Blackfeet tribe made their own laws and said, we can move beaver, we can live trap beaver, and we can move them. The state of Montana does not allow you to live trap beaver and relocate them. That's against the law there. And so that's what they did. They just made a new law and said, this is what we're going to do, because that's how tribal sovereignty works. And so, yeah, they'll go to areas where there's beavers and they'll just relocate them.
Are there casualties in the move?
I don't know. Probably. I mean, so I know that like when other people have done it, they've reported casualties as high as 60 or 70%. Right? I don't know if the tribe is actually tracking if they're surviving or not. They're kind of hard to track. So, but yeah, it's the idea is inviting beaver back into his world building role through this idea of extreme empathy, which I call kin empathy, which is leading into my more recent work on conversing with beavers.
I just want you to back up a little. You're saying the beavers, you're introducing them to areas that need more water, and you were kind of talking about how they help bring water from below up. Is that what's happening? Like, there's actually dry areas where a beaver can find water?
Yeah, so beavers can excavate groundwater systems and make entire damming complexes out of nothing. That's been recorded. But more than that, if you put them in these simple, narrow streams, here, let's go back. Okay, so a lot of these degraded streams are incised like this, which is just another way of saying this is how the cross-section looks like this. They have steep banks and like they're narrow. And so you can imagine in a situation like that, a lot of water coming through. And so you put beavers in, and what they do is when they build their dams, they start to widen it. So that's decreasing the power. It's not decreasing the total amount of water. It's just decreasing like the shear on the system. And that fails. Those dams fail. And then they have to come back. And they go through phase 2 and they build longer. And it has a little bit more success. And then it fails. And then phase 3, they have this braided canal systems and they're rerouting water. As a result of that, this water gets stuck, right? You're literally widening the floodplain. And so the water's going into other areas. It's having more opportunity to absorb into the ground. So you're increasing groundwater recharge. But also another thing that's happening is as they are building these dams, they're making the water deeper. So they're increasing the total amount of volume while proportionally decreasing the surface area for evaporation. So they're storing more water, but the total surface area is going down. So it doesn't evaporate at the same rates. Does that make sense? And so then, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a lot of questions in different areas, but as you talk about cognition, I'm beginning to think, as I was thinking here, when we think about engineering, it's mostly coming from our mind, right?
Yeah.
So the thought is that there's more intuition going on here or something like that. So
Yeah.
begin to go into that next phase, it's kind of like, well, yeah, what is it that drives that? Because that's the stuff that we've kind of weaned out of ourselves. And so, yeah.
It's emergent. So I think about like emergent design. So this is more of this is more of my technical work. So that before is a lot of the work I've done with tribes and the storytelling and what it is to work with tribes. Because working with tribes is oftentimes just sitting down and telling stories, or really being told stories and eating the food you're given. So. Conversing with beavers, so simulating the conversation between landscape builder and architecture with multi-agent simulations. I just want to put this down. So this is the team. I'm not doing this alone. I am a beaver expert who's contributing very heavily to the multi-agent algorithm of this, but this is a team. We have Karen Lee, she's a landscape architect. We have Amir Degani, he is in agricultural robotics. Federico, he's an expert in computation and multi-agent systems. We have another landscape architect who's interested in human interactions on the landscape. I have Justin Werfel, he's the guy who got me through my PhD and really helped me to think algorithmically about these systems. Nathan and Tolu built the first prototype of BeaverBot. So I didn't build the BeaverBot, they did. And then Ben is a computer scientist who's helped me out with some of the computer vision aspects of this problem. So this is a big problem that many people have worked on. And I just want to make sure that that's acknowledged, that it wasn't all me. And then the Beaver Institute, who's enables me to do all sorts of things that are kind of crazy. So again, the beaver, we've already talked about this because I wasn't sure if we didn't want to talk about the other bit. So we'll go again really quickly through the beaver constructs just to remind all of you. So these so we got the dams, we got the ponds, we got the canals, we have the lodges, we have the trails, we have the food caches, and we have the scent mounds. And those individual constructs make the big damming architecture. That takes much larger, it's much bigger than an individual beaver and takes many generations of beavers to build and emerges in all sorts of different shapes and forms all over the world where beavers live and have access to any type of water and vegetation. You've seen this. We talked about how they engineer and the trophic cascades of what beavers are doing. But I want you guys to focus on not the dams or the ponds. We're really going to break it. We're going to focus on the trail systems and the canal systems. So I want you guys just to forget for a minute that beavers build anything else. So beavers have a real problem. So this here is a 3D rendering of one of my field sites that I made with my drone. The ball is supposed to represent a beaver. Just imagine it. And it's moving through a canal right now. And it's going to a dam. And it's zooming up and we're looking down and we're looking at it like we're birds. And from this, I think we have a pretty obvious problem. How, as an individual who's operating in a very, very big environment, able to collectively engineer a system across generations in a way that makes sense? So this is my favorite drawing ever of beaver because the longer you look at it, the worse it gets. There's 50 beavers in there. I don't even think they look like beavers, so this is interesting. And this was an inset of a map from the 1700s. But I'm going to posit that this is a hypothesis about how beavers work, how they engage. And so you got some beavers over here felling a tree. You got some taking off the bark. You got a bunch carrying stuff on their tails. They don't do that, but they have a bunch doing that. They got some ramps. They got a really nice looking lodge over there. And so it's very Henry Ford-esque, right? Everybody has their own station and they're doing their own thing. So, this is a hypothesis that beavers build in a coordinated, organized way with a clear division of labor. This is a foil for how I think about these systems, but it's very helpful. It's a very helpful foil. There's also been observed that the sound of running water triggers beavers to build. This is, I think, well proven for pre-existing architecture. So if you break their dam and they hear running water, they'll build on it. Or you break their lodge, they'll build on it. It gets kind of silly at scale though, because if the louder the sound of running water, they're going to be trying to build dams across Niagara Falls, and that would never work, right? Like at some point it just gets ridiculous and cartoonish. But observation one is dam building and behavior is innate. So that is to say that they will build without being taught to do so. But with exposure to adults, kids will actually get better. So they're kind of at that weird in-between where they'll engage in building behavior, but can get better at it. And because we nearly trapped them to extinction in Europe and in North America, we've had the opportunity to see where they like to go first. And they like to go to areas where they do not have to build. So there's this adage, as busy as a beaver? Well, not really, only if I have to. And so they'll go to areas first that have ponds, deep flowing like lakes, rivers. But then once those areas reach carrying capacity, they'll move out and they'll start terraforming the surrounding environment to suit their life cycle needs, which is I want a deep, slow flowing pond. And so my claim is building behavior in beavers is in response to suboptimal hydraulic conditions. I've had reviewers push back on this, so this is my claim. So this is me doing my fieldwork during my PhD. Here I am in the water in a cowboy hat taking flow rates on the prairie. I'm flying a drone with my dog Fluffy. And yeah, I took flow measurements and I made maps with my drones. And I was able to make 3D and 2D maps of these damming complexes as they were being built. I took weekly scans of these. So, and when I started my thesis, I was like, let's look at the dams, and I'm going to watch where beavers build dams. So I was taking weekly scans with my drone, and I was just mapping, and I was looking for the dams, and I didn't really see much, I have to say. It was a little disappointing. So, but I did see a lot of these trail systems and these canal systems appear. So this is in June for a colony. July 6th, we can see an increase in trails in orange and canals in purple, and we even get our first dam, which is right here. I don't know if you can see it. That's the first dam. Super itty bitty compared to the whole system. And then August 6th, it gets bigger. August 22nd, and then I overlaid all of them together. And you can see at this that these trail systems are massive, and these dams are itty bitty, and you got these canal systems here. And I was very, very, very confused because there was no literature on trails. I couldn't find anything. I stared at this data set for years and I couldn't find anything about the dams. I looked. So then I finally started looking at these trail systems and I found something I think rather interesting. So I looked at when the trails were initiated for the colony observed. So here are the colonies in my data set. These are the dates up top. And what I found is that these trail systems always precede dam building. They always build their trail systems before they build dams, which makes sense because if they're going to build a dam, they need material, and if they're going to have material, they need to get to it. So they build these trails to get to these dams. I was like, that's awesome. That makes sense. That's a nice finding. I don't even have to justify that too much to a reviewer. They're like, yeah. But then the thing that I found was with this previous literature on beavers hear the sound of running water and build, I was like, okay, well, let's look at these compared to flow. So these are my same colonies, but instead of date, I have it out by flow. This was across 3 different streams. And what I found is that these trail systems are initiated over a relatively small range of flow rates. I didn't really find much relationship with the dams as it pertained to flow, only that they always followed the trails. So it seems to me that from my data that I observed that beavers are very informed by the flow conditions for when to engage in building behavior. And the very first construct they make are these trail systems. And then I had these all over my data set, these canal systems, which have one paper about them. There's one paper about beaver canals. And I was like, well, these are all over the place. These are just completely all over my data sets. So I looked over a span of 4 months at a weekly resolution, didn't see much. So I decided to look at the satellite imagery from 1990 to 2022, so a 32-year period. And I was able to see that these canal systems go through these periods of expansion and contraction and expansion and contraction, but on the whole, they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, even though there's like some recession in there and then it goes up again. So the darker the purple, the older the canal, the lighter the purple, the newer the canal. So these systems seem to be growing over much, much bigger timescales than the single observational window that I looked at. So then I looked at where, again, I was really looking at dams. Like I wanted to find something about beaver dams. Spoiler alert, I still don't know anything about beaver dams. So I decided, okay, so where are beavers building their dams in the stream? Are they building their dams at narrow points? Are they building their dams at like sinuous points, straight points, whatever it is? And so I looked at where the dams were according to the stream width or the stream sinuosity. I couldn't find anything. There's no statistical relationship there. And then I looked at the mean dam distance to the canals, and it was a little better. It was a little better, actually. And then I looked at the trail systems, and I found that these trail systems are statistically built much, much closer to these canal systems than they would otherwise be. So beavers are like building these trail systems very, very close to these canal systems, if not right on them. So this is the idea of stigmergy that comes in, and I ripped this off from termites. Okay, we're jumping species again. So this there's this idea called stigmergy, and this was originally developed by a PhD student in the 1950s. And he postulated that architecture is a medium of communication. That if I build here, I'm telling future generations of my termite colony to build here as well. And he called that stigmergy. And so I took that idea and thought about it for beavers, but instead of termite mounds, I think about it in terms of these trail to canal system evolutions. My hypothesis is that these trail systems, if they are productive, will over time erode away into canal systems. Where very productive systems get longer and longer and longer, and you're looking at it at a time period of like decades, many, many generations of beavers coming in. So if a beaver trail system is productive, a productive system being one that connects to high quality vegetation or water, they'll reinforce it. And it'll leave an imprint on the landscape that says, hey, this site is worth investigating for future colonization. So I view this as a conversation between beavers and the landscape. So there's a beaver to beaver conversation across time. So I view these trails as short-term memory, that they're literally embedding into the environment, where if I'm a colony member and I'm swimming along and I see this trailhead, oh, I can follow this trail and build upon it and expand upon it. And these canal systems are long-term memory. So these are productive systems that over time have been embedded into the environment because they've been productive for that long. And of course, they're also having a conversation with the environment. So they have flow, they're responding to flow for wind to build, vegetation quality, and also water quality. And so all three of these things I think about as a conversation between the architecture, the builder, and the environment. So let's see, so you have the environment, which has some conditions that initiates building for the beaver. The beaver responds to the conditions by building an architecture. The architecture fundamentally changes the environment, but it's also at the mercy of the environment, where it's experiencing shear, it's experiencing sedimentation. There's all sorts of things that happen. And then the architecture itself is a medium of communication between species of the beaver. And then the beaver, through the depletion of resources, is not only changing the environment, through their engineering, they're inviting in other species who are also changing the environment as well. So it's a very dynamic system, but I view it as like a constant conversation between these three things going back and forth all the time. But it requires us to view architecture as a language. And if we can learn from beavers on how to speak with landscapes, perhaps we can communicate with beavers with our architecture, and we can use architecture as a language, as a coordination mechanism. But it requires that we use our environment as a computational substrate. So beavers are multi-generational builders. They have their daily activities of foraging, harvesting, rearing kits, building, sleeping. They also have their seasonal behaviors where they're mating in the winter, they have their babies in the spring, they're constructing things in the summer, and they're food caching in the fall. And then the colony cycle, they'll colonize a site they'll deplete the resources of that site, and then they will move to another site, and then they'll move back and forth between sites all the time as they go in, take out the trees, terraform it, move to a new site. And while they're abandoning a site, that site has time to rest, and it's now wider, it has more connection. And so they're actually kind of farming because that area is now bigger and it's bringing in more of the nutrients that are in vegetation that it would have beforehand. And then of course this is happening on a generational cycle where if a beaver comes along and they see a site that's been previously colonized, they can take advantage of it. So these individual actions over time give rise to spatial and temporal complexity at a massive scale. And these landscapes that beavers leave behind inform future generations of beavers where to build. And so I've been building multi-agent simulations to try to test some of these hypotheses that I have on the environment, because you can't go and ask a beaver. So this here is some of the trail systems, just to show you how these things look up close. This is a single colony and they're constantly growing. And through this, I've identified 3 trail types in my data set that emerge into 3 different canal types. I'm about to make another species jump. So this here are neurons. These are neurons inside of our brain. And the reason I grabbed these is because of morphologically how they look. Because I was really struggling to understand these trail systems, and then I saw this was very structurally similar to the trail systems I've seen in the grasslands. So this is a brand new neuron. When a brand new neuron comes out, it's trying to find a connection. So it has all these branches. A lot of these branches are never going to make a connection and they're going to die off. And then over time, once they make connections, an aged neuron is going to look like this. And you're going to get these firmer branches as it has made contact and has made that connection. So this is learning, right? This is what our neurons do to learn, make a new connection. So I have framed beaver trail building as basically beaver trail neurogenesis. They're literally embedding memories into the landscape at a much bigger scale, where a homogeneous area like this is all grassland, there's not a ton of vegetation. They're looking for things. I should note too, this vegetation's super tall. It's up to my shoulders, right? The beavers can't see that far. I can't see that far in it either, right? If I'm standing there, I couldn't see that far. And so they're making all these branches and they're searching. And then you have this other set of trail types that when they connect with the high quality vegetation, this is all ash or willow, you get this firmer branching. And then they also have these smaller trails where they're connecting water sources. So like if a stream bends close to itself, they'll just like start eroding away at that. They'll make a trail and slowly start to turn that into a canal. But it requires that we think about our environments as a gradient, where I'm treating the vegetation as the gradient. You can see a trail system here, I hope. And then you can see some of the trees here, and you can see how they're depleting this line. But yeah. So these are the trail system types. I have homogeneous, heterogeneous, and like water connected, and I'm comparing these to neurons. And so I've been testing these out with multi-agent simulations, trying to get basic hypotheses for beaver behavior by making assumptions where I can deploy digital agents onto a landscape and get them to recreate things like this. I can add digital trees and get them to recreate structures like this, and also connect water sources. I have another multi-agent simulation here where my agents can reconstruct the structure of a damming complex. So this is satellite imagery of Acadia National Park. I deployed my digital agents onto it, and I'm able to reconstruct the structure of the wetland to a pretty high degree of spatial accuracy using a very simple rule protocol, which is when on water, dig, and when not on water, find water. Those are the rules. It's embarrassingly simple for somebody who's spent 10 years thinking about it.
So you've mentioned multi-agent several times, so I just wanted you to explain it a little bit.
Yeah, so a multi-agent system is one where there are, multiple individuals. And the core problem of any multi-agent system is how do you get them to coordinate? So you can think of things like flocks of birds or schools of fish are kind of like a multi-agent system. Why don't they run into each other? What are their rules? And usually these rules are very simple. And so when it comes to construction, how are the multi-agent system is to test these ideas about construction and what are they thinking? And I've gone through many iterations of this. And complicated iterations where I'm adding all these parameters about vegetation and like, no, the simplest ones are the ones that work, it turns out. So yeah, when on water dig, when not on water chase water. That's the simulation. And I can reconstruct these damming complexes in a dynamic environment. I will say though, if the environment's not dynamically represented, so what I mean by that is like water's coming in as spring flooding. If I don't model this as a spring flooded system, it doesn't work. It has to have that actual, I have to accurately represent the hydrology. And if I can accurately represent the hydrology, I can recreate these networks. And I've just been trying different ways of doing that. This is like no drought. This is like a bad modeling. But if I model the hydrology correctly, I can actually reconstruct what I'm seeing in the satellite imagery. So this here is the satellite, the purple is my trace, and the white is my digital agent. I'm pretty good. It's not perfect. I'm pretty good. Where I can get these overlaps and predict where the canals are going to be and where they're going to go. I'm also going to be throwing some machine learning at this, so reinforcement learning, because I think I've hit a wall. But I was recently awarded a National Geographic grant to study canal mimicry with beavers, and I'll be starting this April. And so last summer, one of my colleagues at our field site dug one of these canals for me, and she put up a camera trap. And this idea is that these canal systems are the medium of communication, and we just left the camera trap up to see if beavers would engage with it, and they came. But they were super suspicious. Like, they just checked it out first, but don't worry, I got some cooler videos too.
Where are you starting? You say next month?
Next month, yeah. So I got collaborators in Mississippi, Vermont, and then Harvard Forest. I'm gonna go dig some canals. Yay! I'm too old for this. I need some young, ambitious men, early college that want to dig. Anyway, I'm gonna go dig. So anyway, look, and then they came back after they investigated, and I think it's a female, but I don't know. So, and then she's foraging off of it. I know I'm ruining it. Go. Did she go yet? I don't know if she went yet. No, yeah. I'm just gonna show you the last one when she comes back with the food. So anyway, this was great. I didn't expect this to work, so because my idea was that these productive trail systems get eroded down to canals, and then these canals are the long-term memory. We put some long-term memory, a canal, into the landscape, and they started engaging with it. So I'm going to go test this more rigorously this summer with more camera traps at more field sites. Yay, thank you. Yeah.
The environment is changing. We're not getting as much rain. Things are happening. How much does that affect the beaver habits?
How does
What you're studying?
I mean, so they're very influenced by beaver habit, like the environmental changes.
No, I'm assuming that the beavers are influenced by the environmental changes, but maybe not.
Oh, they are. Globally, you mean?
Is there trouble?
Not as much as you think you would be with these guys. So what happens with beavers when they move into a systems that we thought were dead come back alive. Like, yeah, they're incredibly, like they're engineering these systems we thought were dead. Actually, okay, here's a fun one. So they reintroduced beaver into the UK, and they had some extinct species of flower come back in the area where the beavers engineered because they were digging up the soil and those seeds were still in the soil. So when the beavers went in there, all these flowers came back that they hadn't seen in a couple hundred years. So beavers they just make the environment work for them.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a little bit more resistant than other species to climate change because they modulate their own environment.
And so that modulation also helps the environment respond to the stresses.
Yes, yeah. Yes, they're kind of super animals.
Thanks, it's really fascinating stuff. Can you tell us about the social structures of beaver populations and how it fits into the agent perspective?
Yeah, so I ripped off a lot of ideas from eusocial insects. And there's some key, I mean, so one, a termite isn't a beaver, and a beaver's not a termite, right? Like, at some point, this comparison breaks down. And so, termites, for instance, there's like 1 million individuals in one colony. A beaver colony is like 10 individuals. And so, the framing of this, for me, is I'm treating the whole species as a superorganism, where every single colony is part of like the bigger collective action. And so that is a shift because they don't like each other. I mean, they're really territorial. You know, they don't really want to collaborate. They have their colony and that's their colony and you need to stay out. So they don't collaborate locally, but you see kind of this ramification and reinforcement of these canal systems across generations and across colonies. So it's a very indirect form of collaboration.
So are they, in a colony, are they leaders, like older individuals or?
They're parents. They're parents. I mean, it's a co-dominant, yeah. It's, you know, I got a male, female mated pair and their offspring. And then when the offspring are 2 years old, they go off on their own.
How far away do they have to go before they're allowed to start?
That's a good question. So the biggest number I've heard is 300 miles. The smallest number is like next door.
Next door.
Yeah, like I don't know the answer to that, but I would guess it's a bell curve, like in terms of like the probability of where the beaver's going to go. I don't know, though.
And how many are born every year in a family?
Varies. Anywhere between 1 on a bad year up to 6 on a good year. Although I've heard of up to 9.
So you each year you have some of the previous years staying and then producing more. So that's how you have a family of 10 or 15.
Yeah. But they don't stay. They don't typically stay together like that. Yeah.
How has Blackfoot storytelling affected your hypothesizing and your research?
Well, I grew up swimming with beavers, right? Like I grew up with them. On the ranch in Montana. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana, and so I would, in the summertime, I'd go swim in the river, and we would slide down their beaver dams as like slides. So,
stories that are told.
Yeah. No, so this has been interesting. So clearly I'm white passing, right? Clearly, like I'm 75% European, I'm 25% Native American. I have my tribal ID. I can show you my blood quantum, right? No, I bring this up, like I have a serious point here. And so even on reservations, there's a tremendous amount of diversity of like indigenous, but like even like religion and there's a lot of social diversity on reservations. And one of the things that came out of this work that I wasn't anticipating is how I've been invited into the more ceremonial circles in a way that I didn't necessarily have growing up. So, you know, I've been in ceremony a lot more as an adult than I would have ever thought, you know. And so the Beaver has brought me on a really interesting journey. And he has, in a lot of ways, made me more integrated into the culture I grew up in. Because I grew up with a cowboy. You know, I grew up cowboying. But, like, you know, my dad, you know, and I also grew up in the Blackfeet religion, but I wasn't necessarily part of ceremony. Because you got to remember, we were practicing our religion in secret up until the 1970s. It was illegal to have an indigenous religion, right? So all the religion that I practiced growing up was a secret. Because my dad grew up with it as a secret. And so he's like, don't tell anybody that you know that I'm teaching you how to do this, right? And I mean, so there's just a few social factors there. I think one, it's more acceptable to be integrated into the Blackfeet societies and Blackfeet religions now because it's not illegal. But, you know, there was kind of that overhead. You got to keep this a secret. You can't tell anybody that you're learning this. So I don't know, like, I guess it's been interesting how I've been invited in more, but then I don't know, there's a lot of other social factors where I don't want to be like, I was only brought in because of Beaver. There's like all this other social stuff going on that made access to a lot of these religious practices very challenging. And in fact, the only time like I was part of like kind of a social aspect of a religion, I had to go up to Canada where, they had been practicing longer and they didn't have the same laws. And so they were a lot more comfortable being out in the open, having ceremony and sweats and Sundance and that type of thing. And that's only very recently started up again in the United States in my lifetime.
How big is the Blackfoot Confederacy population?
So I don't know that off that. So I know the Umpscumpy, the southern band where I'm from, the enrollment numbers are around 40,000. But the Blackfoot Confederacy is much, much bigger, right? Because there's 4 tribes and we're all part of the same, we're confederacy. We're like we're all our distinct tribe, but we all are part of the same governing body. Yeah.
Do you all speak the same language?
Yeah. We all speak Blackfeet and English, and the Canadians speak French.
I was wondering from the conservation aspect, if there, and farms are obviously a problem, and the Land Institute in Kansas is I think trying to use kind of mimic prairie ecology to grow food. I mean, is there any hope for bringing the two together? Integrating agriculture and conservation of beavers and mice.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so for example, those bison wallows actually had their own specialized food systems with them. I mean, like they actually, the tribes would grow pumpkins and things in them that you wouldn't be growing anywhere else, right? So they had, and then in terms of bringing in the agricultural bit of it, I mean, you got to cycle the land. I mean, I think if you're already going through the process of cycling the land with like strip forming or whatnot, I think you can do it in such a way that you can get these migration pathways through. But also, like, I've raised cattle and I've interacted with bison, and I could tell you I would never in my life want to raise bison. They are terrifying. They really are terrifying. I was part of the group that got to put GPS tags on them, and like we put them through these chutes. Have you ever seen that scene in Jurassic Park where like the velociraptors are banging up on it? That's what it was like. And they're like, okay, we'll go up there and put a tag on it. I'm like, are you out of your mind?
Wow.
That was wild. So anyway, no, they're terrifying. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I guess. So one of the reasons that conservation is doing so well with tribes is tribes are like, the hell with it. We own all this land. Let's get all these animals back. So I don't know. Like, tribes are really leading on a lot of this. And then in terms of farmers, I mean, farmers care. I grew up with a cowboy. They care a lot about the quality of their land. If they're told, oh, you can get more grass and better grass if you do this cyclical grazing, they'll do it. If you can get water recharge by putting these holes in the ground, they'll do it, really. Or they'll make their kids do it, because that's what my dad did to me. So, yeah.
Have you had any interaction with the Mashpee Wampanoag? They're not trying to raise buffalo, but are there anything?
I haven't yet. I would like to. I haven't yet, though. I'm a prairie Indian. Also, the histories are really different, and they're culturally very different. And so I've actually been learning a lot about them lately. So, yeah, I'm a bit foreign to it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. As I've grown up as a child, the Blackfoot Indians were my favorite Indians. I wanted to be an Indian. That was my